Harlem, New York. Bumpy Johnson's apartment on West 147th Street. Wednesday afternoon, August 21st, 1963. 5 months after their initial meeting at Small's Paradise. 5 months into the heroin distribution operation that Johnson had helped Lucas establish. 5 months of steady profits and successful shipments and gradual expansion of their network throughout Harlem and into other parts of Manhattan. The operation was working exactly as Johnson had planned. Pure heroin imported directly from Southeast Asia, distributed through a carefully organized network of dealers, generating profits that far exceeded what either man had made from traditional numbers rackets and policy banks. But Frank Lucas wasn't satisfied. Lucas sat in Johnson's living room, 33 years old, restless with the kind of ambition that made him simultaneously invaluable as a partner and potentially dangerous as someone who might push too hard, expand too quickly, take risks that could bring down everything they'd built. Lucas had been doing calculations for the past month, analyzing their current operation, identifying inefficiencies and missed opportunities, developing a proposal that he believed would transform their moderately successful heroin business into the most profitable criminal enterprise in New York history. Bumpy Johnson sat across from Lucas in his favorite chair, 56 years old and visibly declining. The cancer that doctors had diagnosed a year earlier, now progressing faster than they'd predicted, now causing pain that Johnson managed with increasing doses of morphine, now making it clear that Johnson's remaining time was measured in months rather than years. Johnson had been spending more time at home recently, delegating daily operations to trusted lieutenants, focusing his energy on ensuring that the transition to Lucas would be smooth, that the empire he'd built wouldn't collapse the moment he died. "Bumpy," Lucas said, leaning forward with the intensity that characterized everything he did, "we need to talk about scale, about what we're currently doing versus what we could be doing, about why we're making thousands per week when we should be making millions per month. I've been running numbers, analyzing the operation, identifying where we're leaving money on the table, and I've got a proposal that will change everything if you're willing to hear it and if you're willing to let me implement it." Johnson looked at Lucas with eyes that showed both curiosity and concern. Understanding that Lucas's proposals tended to be ambitious to the point of recklessness, that Lucas had no natural caution or conservative instincts, that turning Lucas loose without oversight could result either in extraordinary success or catastrophic failure, with nothing in between. "I'm listening," Johnson said, his voice weaker than it had been 5 months earlier, the cancer affecting his strength, even as his mind remained sharp. "But before you start, understand that I'm concerned about expansion. We've got a good thing going. We're making serious money without attracting too much attention from the Italians or the police. The last thing we need is to get greedy, expand too fast, and trigger a response that brings down the entire operation. So whatever you're proposing, it better be smart, and it better be carefully thought through, not just ambitious for the sake of ambition." Lucas pulled a notebook from his jacket pocket, opened it to reveal pages filled with numbers, calculations, organizational charts, and detailed notes that demonstrated he'd been thinking about this proposal for weeks, that this wasn't improvised enthusiasm but systematic analysis of their current operation and identification of specific opportunities for improvement. "Here's the fundamental problem with what we're doing now," Lucas began, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "We're importing pure heroin from Thailand, which is good. We're cutting it ourselves to control quality, which is also good. But then we're distributing it through the same networks that every other heroin dealer uses, street-level dealers who sell to individual users, small-time operators who move maybe a few kilos per month, the traditional retail model that's been used for decades. That model works, but it's inefficient. It leaves enormous amounts of money on the table. It creates unnecessary risk by requiring large numbers of people to be involved in the distribution chain. And most importantly, it caps our growth potential because there are only so many street dealers who can operate in a given territory," Lucas continued, flipping pages in his notebook to show Johnson detailed calculations. "Right now, we're importing approximately 50 kilograms of pure heroin per month. We cut it at a ratio of about 8:1, turning that 50 kilos into 400 kilos of sellable product. We distribute that through roughly 200 street-level dealers who sell directly to users. Each dealer moves maybe 2 kilos per month, generates maybe $15,000 in revenue, keeps $5,000 as their cut, passes $10,000 up to us. Times 200 dealers, that's $2 million per month gross revenue, minus our costs for importation and cutting and paying off cops and everyone else who needs to be paid. We're netting maybe $1.2 million per month. That's good money, better than anything we were making from numbers, but it's nowhere near what this operation could generate if we changed our distribution model completely." Johnson was paying close attention now, understanding that Lucas had clearly spent significant time analyzing their business, that these weren't rough estimates, but carefully calculated figures based on actual operational data. "Go on. What's your alternative to the current model?" Lucas's eyes lit up with excitement, with the passion of someone who'd identified an opportunity that others had missed, who could see a future that hadn't been built yet, but that could be if the right decisions were made. "Instead of selling retail to users, we sell wholesale to other dealers. Instead of being in the retail heroin business, we become the supplier for everyone else's retail operations. We import the pure product, we cut it to consistent quality, and then we sell it in bulk, 5 kilos, 10 kilos, 50 kilos at a time, to Italian crime families, to other black syndicates, to anyone who wants to buy wholesale heroin at prices that undercut their current suppliers." Lucas continued, talking faster now, enthusiasm building as he laid out his vision. "Think about it, Bumpy. Right now, the Italian families control wholesale heroin distribution in New York. They import it, they cut it, they sell it to mid-level dealers, who then distribute it through their retail networks. But their product is expensive and inconsistent quality because it goes through multiple layers of middlemen who each cut it further and take their profit. Our product is better. It's purer. It's more consistent. And because we're importing directly from the source without going through Italian middlemen, we can sell it cheaper than they can while still making enormous profits." Johnson interrupted, his voice skeptical. "Frank, you're talking about competing directly with the Italian mob for the wholesale market. You're talking about taking business away from the 5 families who've controlled drug importation in this city for decades. Those are not people you want as enemies. Those are people who will kill you and everyone associated with you if you threaten their core business interests. So you better have a damn good explanation for how we're supposed to survive. The response we'll get when the Italians realize we're undercutting their wholesale heroin operation. Lucas nodded, having anticipated this objection. I'm not proposing we compete with them directly in their territory. I'm proposing we offer them something they can't get anywhere else, pure heroin, at TOEIC prices lower than what they're currently paying their own suppliers. Right now, the Italians are importing heroin that's already been cut multiple times by the time it reaches New York. They're paying high prices for mediocre product. We can offer them pure heroin, straight from Thailand, at prices that are 30% below what they're currently paying, with quality that's exponentially better. Lucas leaned forward, his voice dropping to emphasize the importance of what he was saying. They'll buy from us because it makes them more money. They can take our pure product, cut it themselves, and sell it through their networks at profits that are double or triple what they're making now. We're not threatening their distribution networks or their retail operations. We're offering to be their supplier, to make them more profitable, while making ourselves rich in the process. It's a partnership, not a competition. We supply wholesale. They distribute retail. Everyone wins. Johnson was silent for a long moment, processing Lucas's proposal, considering the implications, weighing the potential profits against the risks of dealing with Italian organized crime families who were notoriously violent when they felt threatened. You're proposing we become the Italians' heroin supplier. You're suggesting that instead of building our own retail network, we supply the wholesale market and let everyone else handle the retail distribution. That's an interesting idea, Frank, but it's also extremely dangerous if we execute it wrong. The Italians don't like black criminals getting too powerful. They tolerate us running numbers and policy banks in black neighborhoods because that doesn't threaten their core interests, but becoming a major heroin supplier that they depend on, that gives us power over them, and they don't like anyone having power over them. Lucas smiled, understanding Johnson's concern, but believing he'd already solved that problem through careful, strategic thinking. That's exactly why this works, Bumpy. Yes, it gives us power because they become dependent on our supply. But it also makes us valuable to them, which means they have incentive to protect us rather than destroy us. If they kill us, they lose access to the best, cheapest heroin in New York. They'd have to go back to their old suppliers who charge more for worse product. We become too valuable to kill. Lucas continued, and here's the other piece of this strategy. We don't just sell to the Italians. We sell to everyone. Italian families, black syndicates in Brooklyn and the Bronx, independent operators, anyone who wants to buy wholesale heroin at prices that undercut the competition. We become the Walmart of wholesale heroin. We offer the best product at the lowest prices, and we make our money through volume rather than through excessive markup. We're talking about moving hundreds of kilos per month instead of 50. We're talking about gross revenues of $10 million per month instead of $2 million. We're talking about net profits that could be $5 million to $7 million monthly if we execute this correctly. Johnson's skepticism was fading, replaced by genuine interest in the scale of what Lucas was proposing. $5 million per month in profits would be extraordinary. That would make us richer than most of the Italian families. That would make us the most successful black criminal enterprise in American history. But Frank, that kind of money also brings that kind of attention. The police will notice when we're suddenly living like millionaires. The FBI will start investigating. Other criminals will try to rob us or take over our operation. How do we handle that level of success without getting destroyed by the attention it brings? Lucas had clearly thought about this as well, flipping to another page in his notebook that showed organizational structures and security protocols. We stay quiet. We don't flaunt the money. We invest it in legitimate businesses that can launder the cash: restaurants, nightclubs, real estate, car dealerships. We live well, but not ostentatiously. No gold Cadillacs, no flashy jewelry, no obvious displays of wealth that attract attention. We dress like businessmen. We behave like businessmen. We present ourselves as successful, legitimate operators rather than as criminals making millions from heroin. Lucas continued, as for security, we compartmentalize everything. The people who handle importation don't know the people who handle distribution. The people who cut the product don't know who the wholesale customers are. We create cells that operate independently. So, if the police arrest one part of the organization, they can't bring down the whole operation. We pay police and politicians enough to keep them looking the other way, but not so much that they get greedy and demand more. We're smart, we're careful, we're systematic. We treat this like a legitimate business that happens to be selling an illegal product. Johnson looked at Lucas for a long time, seeing in this young man's eyes the same ambition and ruthlessness that Johnson himself had possessed 30 years earlier. Recognizing that Lucas was proposing exactly the kind of bold strategic thinking that separated criminals who built empires from criminals who just survived year to year in the street game. How quickly can you implement this? Johnson asked, his tone indicating he'd made his decision, that he was going to approve Lucas's proposal despite the risks, that he was willing to bet the operation they'd spent 5 months building on Lucas's vision of wholesale domination. Lucas's response was immediate. I can have the first wholesale deals completed within 2 weeks. I've already been making preliminary contacts with potential buyers, testing interest without committing to anything. There's enormous demand for pure heroin at competitive prices. The challenge isn't finding customers. The challenge is importing enough product to meet the demand we're going to create. Which brings me to the other part of my proposal. Lucas flipped to another page, showing shipping schedules and quantity calculations. We need to dramatically increase our importation volume. Right now, we're bringing in 50 kilos per month. To supply wholesale markets effectively, we need to be importing at least 500 kilos per month, maybe more. That requires more capital for purchasing product in Thailand, more sophisticated smuggling methods to move larger quantities without detection, and more corrupt military personnel on our payroll to facilitate the shipments. Johnson nodded slowly. I can provide additional capital. I've got approximately $800,000 in cash that we can invest in expanding the operation. That should be enough to fund several large purchases in Thailand and to establish more reliable smuggling routes. But Frank, understand that if we scale up to this level, if we start moving 500 kilos per month, there's no going back. We either succeed spectacularly or we fail catastrophically. There's no middle ground when you're operating at that scale. Lucas's smile was cold, confident, showing no doubt whatsoever about his ability to execute what he was proposing. We're not going to fail, Bumpy. This is going to work because the economics are too compelling for it not to work. We can buy pure heroin in Thailand for $4,000 per kilo. We can sell it wholesale in New York for $50,000 per kilo. That's a markup of more than 1,000%. Even after paying for shipping, paying off corrupt officials, covering all our operational costs, we're still making profit margins that are absolutely extraordinary. The math works. The strategy is sound. All we need is the courage to execute it at scale. Over the next 3 weeks, from late August through mid-September 1963, Frank Lucas implemented the wholesale heroin distribution strategy he'd proposed to Bumpy Johnson. Lucas personally negotiated wholesale supply agreements with representatives from 3 of the 5 Italian crime families operating in New York, with 2 major black syndicates in Brooklyn, and with several independent, large-scale dealers who'd been buying from Italian suppliers, but who were eager to switch to Lucas's superior product at lower prices. The response was exactly what Lucas had predicted. Wholesale customers were enthusiastic about the quality of Lucas's heroin, which was significantly purer than anything available through traditional Italian suppliers. The prices Lucas offered were 25 or 30% below market rates, which meant customers could make substantially more profit by buying from Lucas than from their previous sources. And Lucas's reliability, consistent quality, reliable delivery schedules, professional business practices made him an attractive alternative to Italian suppliers who were often unreliable and who treated their customers with contempt. By October 1963, just 2 months after Lucas had presented his proposal to Johnson, the operation had completely transformed. Instead of importing 50 kilograms monthly and selling retail through street-level dealers, they were now importing 600 kilograms monthly and selling wholesale to approximately 30 major buyers who each purchased between 10 and 50 kilograms per transaction. The organizational complexity had increased dramatically, requiring sophisticated logistics, careful record-keeping, systematic quality control, and extensive security measures to protect both product and cash. But the financial results were extraordinary. In October 1963, the Lucas Johnson heroin operation generated gross revenue of $11.3 million from wholesale sales. After deducting costs for importation, $2.4 million for 600 kilos at $4,000 per kilo, shipping and smuggling fees, $800,000, payments to corrupt officials, $600,000, cutting and packaging costs, $200,000, and various other operational expenses, $400,000. The net profit was $6.9 million for a single month. $6.9 million in net profit in October 1963, equivalent to roughly $70 million in 2024 dollars, generated by a heroin distribution operation that had started just 7 months earlier as a relatively modest effort to import pure heroin and sell it through traditional retail networks. Frank Lucas's strategic insight, that wholesale distribution offered dramatically better profit margins and lower risk than retail sales, had transformed a successful criminal operation into the most profitable black-owned enterprise in New York, possibly in the entire United States. November 1963 was even better. As word spread throughout New York's criminal underworld about the quality and price of Lucas's heroin, more wholesale buyers approached him seeking supply agreements. Lucas was now selling to 5 of the 5 Italian families, to 6 major black syndicates across the city, to several Chinese criminal organizations in Chinatown, and to independent dealers from as far away as Philadelphia and Boston who were willing to travel to New York to purchase Lucas's product because it was so superior to anything available in their home markets. In November 1963, the operation generated $15.7 million in gross revenue and $9.2 million in net profit. The scale was almost incomprehensible. $9 million in profit in a single month from an operation that employed fewer than 50 people directly, and that operated with remarkable efficiency. By maintaining strict separation between importation, processing, and distribution functions. December 1963 brought the culmination of everything Lucas had envisioned when he'd proposed the wholesale strategy to Johnson in August. The holiday season created increased demand for heroin as users sought to purchase more product and dealers sought to stock up for the winter months. Lucas had anticipated this seasonal spike and had arranged for 3 large shipments, totaling 900 kilograms, to arrive in early December, gambling that he could sell that entire volume before the end of the month. The gamble paid off spectacularly. In December 1963, the Lucas Johnson heroin operation generated $18.4 million in gross revenue and $11.1 million in net profit. $11 million in profit in a single month. $133 million annually, if that level could be sustained. Money on a scale that exceeded what most legitimate corporations earned, all flowing through a criminal enterprise run by 2 black men who'd recognized an opportunity that traditional organized crime had missed. That controlling supply, rather than distribution, was where the real money existed. That wholesale, rather than retail, was the path to extraordinary wealth. Bumpy Johnson lived to see these numbers, lived to see his final major operation succeed beyond anything he'd imagined when he'd first approached Frank Lucas with the idea of importing heroin directly from Southeast Asia. Johnson died on July 7, 1968, nearly 5 years after Lucas had proposed the wholesale strategy. 5 years during which their operation had generated approximately $400 million in revenue and roughly $250 million in net profits. 5 years that had made both men extraordinarily wealthy, and that had established Frank Lucas as the most powerful heroin distributor in New York. But the moment that mattered most, the conversation that changed everything, happened on Wednesday afternoon, August 21st, 1963, when Frank Lucas sat in Bumpy Johnson's apartment and explained why selling retail was leaving millions of dollars on the table, why wholesale distribution was where the real money existed, why they should be supplying other criminals rather than competing with them, why volume and efficiency mattered more than markup and territory. That conversation, that proposal, that moment when Lucas convinced Johnson to completely reimagine their business model, that was when everything changed. That was when a moderately successful heroin operation became an empire. That was when Frank Lucas stopped being just another ambitious criminal and became a visionary who understood business principles that most organized crime figures never grasped. The proposal Lucas made to Johnson in August 1963 contained several insights that were revolutionary in the context of 1960s organized crime. First, Lucas understood that controlling supply was more valuable than controlling distribution. Traditional organized crime focused on territory, controlling specific neighborhoods where drugs could be sold. Lucas recognized that whoever controlled the supply could sell to anyone regardless of territory. That being the source was more powerful than being a distributor. Second, Lucas understood that undercutting price while maintaining quality, was a winning strategy. Most criminals marked up their product as much as possible, trying to maximize profit per transaction. Lucas recognized that lower margins with higher volume generated more total profit while also building customer loyalty and making it difficult for competitors to match his prices. Third, Lucas understood that treating criminal enterprise like legitimate business with careful financial planning, systematic organization, professional customer service created advantages that traditional criminals who operated through violence and intimidation couldn't match. Lucas's wholesale customers preferred buying from him not just because of price and quality, but because doing business with him was reliable and professional in ways that dealing with traditional Italian suppliers was not. Fourth, Lucas understood that vertical integration, controlling the entire supply chain from source to wholesale distribution, created profit margins that traditional models couldn't achieve. By eliminating middlemen and importing directly from Thailand, Lucas captured value that in traditional organized crime models was distributed among multiple parties. These insights, revolutionary in the context of 1960s organized crime, are actually fundamental business principles that legitimate corporations had been applying for decades. Lucas's genius was recognizing that these principles applied equally to illegal businesses, that drug trafficking could be optimized using the same strategic thinking that made legitimate businesses successful. The financial results from implementing Lucas's strategy spoke for themselves. From August through December 1963, 5 months of wholesale operations, the Lucas Johnson enterprise generated approximately $27.8 million in net profits. That 5-month period established patterns and relationships that would continue generating enormous profits for the next decade, until Lucas's eventual arrest in 1975. The impact of Lucas's August 1963 proposal extended beyond just financial success. By demonstrating that black criminals could operate at the highest levels of drug trafficking, could establish international supply chains, could compete successfully with Italian organized crime families that had dominated the drug trade for decades, Lucas changed perceptions about what was possible for black criminal enterprises. He proved that intelligence and strategic thinking mattered more than traditional mob connections, that innovation could overcome established advantages, that ambitious black criminals didn't need to accept subordinate roles working for white organized crime families, but could instead build independent operations that rivaled or exceeded anything the traditional mob had created. The proposal also demonstrated the importance of mentorship and knowledge transfer between criminal generations. Lucas's success was built on the foundation Bumpy Johnson had provided: the initial Thai connections, the seed capital, the corrupt official network, the strategic guidance. But Lucas took what Johnson gave him and expanded it exponentially through his own strategic insights. This combination of Johnson's experience and Lucas's innovation created something neither man could have built alone. For Bumpy Johnson personally, seeing Lucas's proposal succeed provided validation of his decision to invest his final years in grooming a successor. Johnson had bet his legacy on Frank Lucas, had given Lucas the resources and knowledge to build something extraordinary, and had lived to see that bet pay off spectacularly. Johnson died knowing that his final major operation had succeeded, that the heroin empire he'd helped establish would continue after his death, that he'd identified and developed someone capable of surpassing his own achievements. For Frank Lucas, the August 1963 proposal to Johnson represented the moment when he stopped being Bumpy Johnson's protege and became a criminal visionary in his own right. The wholesale distribution strategy was Lucas's idea, his insight, his contribution to their partnership. Yes, Johnson had provided the foundation, but Lucas had built something unprecedented on that foundation through his own strategic thinking. The conversation between Lucas and Johnson on August 21st, 1963, lasted approximately 3 hours. In those 3 hours, Lucas laid out a complete reimagining of how heroin distribution should work, supported by detailed financial analysis and operational planning. In those 3 hours, Johnson was convinced to approve a strategy that would generate hundreds of millions of dollars over the next decade. In those 3 hours, the future of New York's heroin trade was determined by two black criminals who understood that business principles mattered more than traditional criminal thinking. What Frank Lucas told Bumpy Johnson that August afternoon didn't just make them $100 million. It actually made them substantially more than that over the following years, made them two of the wealthiest criminals in American history, made Lucas a legend whose story would be told in books and films decades later. But more importantly, what Lucas told Johnson demonstrated that criminal enterprises could be optimized and scaled using business principles, that strategic thinking mattered as much as violence, that innovation could overcome established advantages. Wednesday afternoon, August 21st, 1963. The day Frank Lucas walked into Bumpy Johnson's apartment with a notebook full of calculations and a proposal that would change everything. The conversation that transformed a successful heroin operation into an empire. The moment when Lucas explained why wholesale distribution would make them exponentially wealthier than retail sales ever could. 3 hours of conversation. One revolutionary proposal. Results that generated over $250 million in profits over the next 5 years, making it one of the most successful criminal operations in American history. That was what Frank Lucas told Bumpy Johnson. That was the idea that made them extraordinarily wealthy. That was the August afternoon, yes, 1963, when a young, ambitious criminal convinced a dying kingpin to completely reimagine their business model, and that reimagining created an empire that would dominate New York's heroin trade for more than a decade. The proposal that made history. The conversation that created a fortune. The moment when strategic thinking proved more valuable than traditional criminal methods. August 21st, 1963, when Frank Lucas explained to Bumpy Johnson exactly how they were going to make $100 million, and then proceeded to exceed even that ambitious projection through pure strategic genius and flawless execution.